And yes, here we are, folks. We are live here in the spoiler room. And Casablanca, Citizen Kane, Rocky, all of those classic films, Shawshank Redemption, Saving Private Ryan, all of those epic films fade in comparison to tonight's epic film that we will be talking about. This piece of cinematic classic, just celluloid, is going to be the topic of discussion. And we are talking about Killer Klowns from Outer Space. Oh, yeah.
It's a piece of something, all right.
Oh, this is going to be a great discussion. Yes, from 1988, Killer Klowns from Outer Space. And of course, you heard his voice, my right-hand man, our co-host here in the spoiler room. It is none other than Ian Simmons. Hello, Ian. And are you ready to talk some Killer Klowns?
Yes, I am. Although I possibly would rather be wrapped up in a cotton candy cocoon and sucked on by aliens. Sorry, have my blood sucked on by aliens.
They're two different things there, Ian. One of them gets you an X rating and put behind the beaded curtain. The other one, you're on the horror section. So,
either way I win, I feel like, but
Oh, this is definitely going to be interesting. It's funny because it is part of Where You From month. We're wrapping it up here. And I thought this was perfect because we had these films where we've talked about, this was kind of smarter than I expected. Once it got here, it was really cool. And wow, this was really interesting. And this one was really cool. And then I had to end it on this fun cult classic because I knew one of these, I think, I don't know how Ian feels about it yet. We'll find out here momentarily. But I knew one of these might be of differing opinions on. So, Ian, before we get into the popcorn bowl of Killer Klowns from Outer Space, please, sir, give my listeners the synopsis of this cult classic film.
Okay, you know the title. And scene.
Cheers, sir.
No, okay. It's 1988. I swear this movie takes place. It's the same year, but I think it actually takes place like the next town over from the wonderful Blob remake.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the kids are out on Makeout Point. There's a meteor or some kind of a astrological thing that passes over their heads that ruffles all of their hair, and yet when you see it in the long shot, all the trees are standing still. It flies down into the woods, and it's a giant circus tent from outer space. It's a spaceship. It's populated by killer clowns from outer space who go into town and start murdering people in a lot of clown and circus themed ways. And yet we've got our two Makeout Point kids, Mike and Deb, mm-hmm. who are trying to team up with a pair of ice cream truck driving goofballs and the town deputy who used to go out with Deb, or they used to kind of have a thing together. And then there's the gruff police sergeant, Officer Mooney, played by the lovely John Vernon. I think it was John Vernon. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah.
It was Mooney was John Vernon.
Yeah, great character actor, great hard ass from the 80s and beyond. And they fight the aliens, and no one believes them until it's too late, and the town is being swept up by these giant machines after the clowns cocoon people in cotton candy, as I alluded to, so they can take them back to their home planet and suck their blood out of silly straws. That's Killer Klowns from Outer Space. I used to love this movie. This movie was perfect when I was 11 because that 1988 was an amazing year for weird horror movies. There was The Blob. It was Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. It was Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood with Jason versus Carrie.
Oh, I loved that one.
God. Yeah. And then even this movie, I loved the aesthetic of it. I like that it got made. I think the Chiodo brothers have a tremendous spirit about them. But watching it, just recently for this conversation, I had the same problem that I did the last time I tried to watch it a few years ago, and I bought the Blu-ray. I was so excited. I'm like, Killer Klowns in high def with special features. And I watched it. I'm like, I am no longer 11 because this does not hold up as a movie, really. It's just very kind of flat, and it's got some great production design, some wonderful creature makeup, and some cool ideas, but it's not scary. It's barely funny. It's just kind of a little half-baked, I think.
And see, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. My wife has the Midnight Madness DVD release that they did of it. So not only do you get the movie, but you get interviews with the Kyoto brothers, some behind the scenes stuff, blooper reels and that. And that's very fascinating. And it's, yeah, you mentioned before we get into the film, 1988 for horror films. I mean, you had Black Roses that year. You had Brain Damage. You had Child's Play. You had
Is that also Monkey Shines? Was that 88?
Dead
too?
Heat. Let's see. I think Monkey Shines was that year too. Maniac Cop, Lady. I mean, 1988. Shit, we could do a whole series of episodes on the horror of 1988 because the sheer volume and Return of the Living Dead Part 2 was 1988.
Also starring Suzanne Snyder from Killer Klowns from Outer Space.
Exactly. Sorority Babes at the Slime Bowl Ballorama was 1980. This was a peak year for horror. That's when the first witchcraft movie came out, was in 1988. For those of you who may have listened to our Astro Radio Z Epic series where we covered the witchcraft franchise and Wood Chipper Massacre. I mean, this year, you're absolutely right, is crazy. So this was actually fitting that Killer Klowns from Outer Space came out this same year because it was a crazy year for horror and obscure horror. And I love the Blob remake. And in the behind the scenes stuff, the Kyoto brothers mentioned that's what they were going for, was a Blob type. They were influenced by the Blob, the original The Blob, you know, where you have a gentleman who's like 35 trying to be 18. But anyway,
you know, and that's kind of the issue I had with it is I couldn't tell if the people behind the movie were trying to satirize the genre or if they were just making a crappy 1988 horror movie. You know, I look at you know, this came out almost 20 years later, but Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, where you've got John C. Reilly playing a 12-year-old kid in the flashback scene. You know, that you're drawing attention to it and making it into a big joke. When I see this, I'm like, yeah, they're obviously way older than high school or junior college, however they're supposed to be. But given that that's how every movie of that type was, it's like you really have to go the extra mile to call out how ridiculous it is. Otherwise, you're just making what everyone else is making.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the original Blob, you had who was the lead? He was like 35.
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen. He was like 35, and he was supposed to be 18. Here, at least, our main characters were like in their late 20s, trying to play teenagers, which was typical 80s fashion.
But I was thrown. Like, are they teenagers? Because they look like they're at least in college, but they're also at makeout point. I'm like, who goes to makeout point where they're in college? What is that?
I guess small towns, they do. You're right. They were graduated, I think, because they refer to the brothers when they used to get into trouble a lot, and they were friends, but it's never really established. So I think they are actually supposed to be out of high school, but you're right. They go to make out point as if they're in high school. They don't mention a college at all.
Well, also, like Mike and Deb are drinking they're drinking champagne at Lookout Point. Or as they call it, Top of the World.
Top of the World. What was even better. And folks, you folks, if you have a makeout point, and if you've got a date, a significant other, you take out to makeout point, you want to have things get a little steamy, don't forget to bring your inflatable raft, because it's a cushion. It's like a mattress, but it's inflatable and cushy in case there's a flood. Because our folks here, Mike and Debbie,
there'll be a flood if they're doing it right.
If they're doing it right, yeah. That's a whole nother. That's again behind the beaded curtain, which I should make a movie now. Behind the beaded curtain. Anyway, um,
You know what?
copyright spoiler.
No, you should make a documentary about like the X-rated section in video stores from like the 80s and call it Behind the Beaded Curtain. Everyone would know what you're talking about and everyone would watch that movie.
Exactly. Yeah. I could copyright spoiler room. There you go. But yeah, it was just hilarious that they're on a raft. But in every other movie, I'm like, okay, this is going to be that's kind of ridiculous. Here, it's just like, okay, we're watching a film called Killer Klowns from Outer Space. So the fact they're making out, drinking champagne on a inflatable raft inside the back of a truck, I'm like, okay. I've actually kind of accepted that already. And we've got to mention in this opening, we also get a fantastic yet short appearance by Mr. Royal Dano, who, if you wanted a crazy old man cast, you picked Royal Dano because he was actually in a movie 2 years later that we've talked about in the spoiler room, and I got a chance to interview the director, Space Invaders, where he played almost the exact same character, where he was an old guy with a dog who sees the Space Invaders. Here he sees the Killer Klowns. And I imagine, knowing what I know about the film and after talking to Robert Johnson about it, I imagine that was deliberate because he was very similar to his role. But I loved his character. And getting to meet the clowns, unfortunately, he's the first victim of the clowns. But I guess what I really enjoy about this film is their commitment to the gimmick. You do get gimmick movies like this, with the hook and everything, that once you watch them, you're like, well, why'd they call it that? You barely got, whatever in it. But here they commit fully, from the design of the internal spaceship hallways to each clown looking different. They could have easily made most of the clowns look the same and only have a certain amount, but every clown has their own unique design and look and feature about them. And, all their technology is, yes, ridiculous, but it's clown related. They committed to this completely. I mean, what did you think of the art direction and the overall production with the different clowns and everything?
I mean, it's superb. I like I mentioned, when Mike, who I just saw on IMDb, Mike's last name is Tobacco.
Yes. And she's Debbie Stone. And you got Curtis Mooney and Farmer Gene Green.
Farmer Green. Yeah, there was something going on in that set. But when Debbie and Mike first go into the spaceship, they go into this one door and they're presented with it's almost like a scene in Star Wars where Luke and Leia are shooting at the stormtroopers across the giant shaft. You see this shaft that goes on forever, it seems, and there's a big electrical glowing ball at the top, and it's all matte painting and 1980s animation, and it's beautiful looking. I would love to see an art book like The Making of Killer Klowns from Outer Space and read that 5 times rather than sit through this movie again, because I can't fault the idea or the design. The whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking I would like to see a remake of this movie where they really commit not only to the bit but to making a horror movie instead of this off-brand comedy that's sort of paying homage to early horror movies. Make something that's actually scary, because there's the one scene that stands out here where the clown kills Mooney, the sheriff or whoever, and turns his body into this weird ventriloquist dummy. It looks like something out of Stephen King's It. And you've got Dave, the deputy ex-boyfriend of Debbie and Dave, who's confronted with this, and it's genuinely creepy. And then when Mooney, you see his body, and it's like the life is just out of his eyes, and he's got those ventriloquist dummy, bloodlines in the rose cheeks. It's great stuff, but nothing else in the movie gets to that point where I'm like skeeved out. I did like the shadow puppet thing. I've always loved the group of people at the bus stop where there's the clown making shadow puppets against the wall. One of them is a T-Rex with a glowing eye, and the shadow comes out and actually scoops up the people and eats them. Again, great idea. But
Well,
the rest of it is like, I don't know.
well, the Kyoto brothers are known for special effects, all three of them, especially that. I mean, even the behind the scenes stuff, and they're still today the Kyoto brothers. They promote themselves as special effects artists, and each one of them has a different specialty, and you find that out in the behind the scenes documentary. And you're right. What's very fascinating about this film is all the technical aspects and work that they put into it. While the script is wafer thin, what you get in here is fantastic. I mean, these clowns are legitimately creepy. If you put them in a more of a darker horror setting, which this is dark comedy, but it is still leaning more towards the comedy outside of the ventriloquist part, which is dark, and a couple other scenes in here that are meant to be like actual legitimate horror parts, like in the jail cell later where they find two of the convicts splatted against the wall with the cotton candy, and they peel it off, and the face is all melted, and then you get the bloody hand down, and it's lit dark, and it's actually kind of like a horror scene. It's like, holy crap. And yeah, I mean, if they would have mixed, I think for some people, and for me, I loved all of it. I didn't mind it, but I totally get what you're getting at, is that there were opportunities here to make this darker and lean more on the horror scary aspect than the camp aspect. But they more wanted to do a camp, and with their skills, it was fitting because their special effects skills shine. Because whatever you think of the story, the animatronics in the masks for the clowns alone, and the artwork in the faces, because you get a lot of close-ups, folks. This isn't like from a distance or color shadow. You get to see these, and these are full-on Hollywood, like upper Hollywood quality prosthetic effects and puppeteering effects on these faces. But it's in a campy atmosphere, so they're less scary. I'm imagining that's what you're kind of talking about, right? Is just the fact that there's potential here.
You brought up Child's Play, came out the same year. That's a legit, weird, creepy little horror movie that went on to have decades of sequels that of varying quality and varying, some of them were trying to be campy and some of them were trying to be scary. But if you just take the premise of like, oh, it's a serial killer, it gets into essentially a My Buddy or Teddy Ruxpin type of a doll, it sounds stupid, but in the execution, it's terrifying. This, right. I think you could have a situation where you've got a movie called Killer Klowns from Outer Space. People go seeing, oh, this is going to be so dumb. We're just going to go and laugh at it. And yet you scare the fuck out of people and make it into a classic. This is a classic movie. It's kind of a cult thing. And again, I loved it up until I watched it, 5 or 10 years ago when I was fully an adult and the sheen had worn off. And I'm really picking up on, they're doing that thing where they've only got so much length of hallway. So when people are running away from the clowns, they're really hustling in place, trying to make it work. And maybe that's an homage to other bad horror movies or whatever. But I'm like, just make a good horror movie.
And again, see, for me, I never went into it with expecting anything but just a fun camp stuff, and I'm a big visuals guy, so I love the visuals and the clowns and everything. And yet I totally get what you're saying, though. There is a lot of potential here to make it a legitimately scary horror film. But it even if it's not the case, you do feel the fun that they're having fun making this film, for sure. And they put in a lot of cool stuff in, like there's again, I found almost the technical aspect of how they did some of this stuff even more fascinating than the film, because I was very entertained. I've watched this many times and I'm still entertained. No, it is not a horror movie. I will say right now, not a horror film. It is a campy film that's, it's got horror in it, but it's not really scary moments at all in this. Nothing to make you jump, but I thoroughly enjoy it. And especially all the technical stuff that goes into a campy film like this that they made, because like the scene where the clown is riding, there's this scene where a car is driving away and a clown is riding an invisible car basically. And the way they did that is they built this kind of track next to the car, and the guy in the clown suit, they built it so that the controller looks like a clown hand. So the guy in the suit could actually move the tram back and forth and away from the car and towards the car, but it looks like he was moving his hands. And I'm like, that's creative. I mean, they did a lot of creative stuff. So you could tell these guys really, their strength was the visual effects because that shines. Just don't think about the story because there isn't a whole lot to it.
And that's, you keep coming back to the word campy, which I understand. But I don't think this is campy. I think it's broad. No,
really?
I think it's just broad, bad humor.
Okay.
The camp, I don't think it's smart enough to be that self-aware where it's like, we're going to make a legit throwback movie. I think they're just thinking, we're just going to get these people who are, it's almost like, I keep bringing this up as a reference, but Joel Schumacher, when he was making his Batman movies, kept screaming at, the action. It's a comic book, it's a comic book, just like go crazy, do whatever. There was no like real direction. I feel like the direction was all reserved for the special effects and pulling off a beautiful looking, B movie. Whereas if you had a really competent screenplay and people who knew how to really take command of their actors, for example, the end of this film, you've got the Terenzi brothers?
Yeah, the Terenzi brothers.
These guys are like 45 years old, and they're just like these loser ice cream truck brothers. They rip off the end of Once Bitten, the great Jim Carrey vampire comedy from 2 years before this, where they go into, in that case, it's vampires. They're going into the vampire's lair, which is this big pristine mansion. You get the two horny goofball doofuses that get separated from the rest of the group. I think they even fall into a pit or something, and they end up with two naked, horny vampires. In this case, they end up with two, fully clothed, but female clown aliens. They don't do anything with that gag, which I think is a big crime. But
well, they do. Yeah, they do. Well, the one alien, her clown, her chest actually grows as she sees them. So there is that.
No, but when I say they don't do anything with it, like the next time we see them, they're crawling out of the freezer, right? Or they crash their truck through the. This is why this is so fucking dumb. They crashed the ice cream truck through the wall of this spaceship, a spaceship that is meant to go through outer space. The hull can be penetrated by a goddamn ice cream truck.
They didn't have their shields up.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Even that's how I took. They didn't have their shields up. Come on. They're on the ground. They don't need the shields. They're trying to be a big top. So
you can't drive an ice cream truck through the hull of an aircraft carrier.
Depends on the ice cream truck. I mean,
I'm just saying this movie is not well thought out. There's a lot of first of all, Suzanne Snyder takes the longest shower in the history of movies. And this is a failure of editing on this part, because the movie is so obsessed with these little side adventures, a lot of like what ifs, like what if there were alien clowns and they came to a small town and their whole gimmick was killing people using clown cliches. What would that look like? Well, you could have a shadow puppet where the monster actually eats people. You could have a clown that develops boxing gloves and they punch the head off of someone.
That was hilarious.
Yeah, it was nice. It reminded me of the I don't think it was as well executed as when Jason Takes Manhattan did it a year later. So, compliments to the Kyoto brothers for, I guess, originality. But they kept flashing back to these little interstitials, breaking up the main action to the point where when you get to Suzanne Snyder in the shower, she gets in the shower. She's brushing this popcorn off of her that she picked up, in the spaceship. And I guess it gives the popcorn enough time to gestate into these worm creatures. Yeah. But you keep flashing back to her in the shower amidst the rest of this stuff. And 15 minutes of movie time has passed. There's people like going across town and other people getting murdered. And, there's whole things going on that would have taken like 2 hours in movie time. And she's still in the damn shower.
Well, she wanted to make sure to get all that popcorn butter off. I don't
I
know.
don't want to be crude, but if you're going to make me sit through a 2-hour shower in a horror movie, it better be more than a bit of a modest, oh, I'm going to grab my towel from out behind the curtain like nobody does.
Oh, come on. You got the girl in the negligee answering the door for the pizza gimmick. So, uh,
Well, by the way, possibly a worse actress than the Terenzi brothers. Couldn't even feign shock and surprise.
Oh. Well, she didn't have time. Then she got, wrapped up in a cotton candy cocoon, which, yeah, I had fun with this movie. I don't know. I looked at it differently. I just was sitting back and chuckling at all the gimmicks. I love the shadow puppet. I love the pizza popping out. I love the fact that they put our heroine in a ball rather than, in a bigger balloon instead of the cotton candy sack for whatever reason. They don't wrap her up in the cotton candy sack. Maybe they were going to take her away for later for road snack or something. I don't know.
I wondered about that too. Like, she was the one girl in the end, because by this point they've captured more than half the town.
Right.
It's because it's the main girl of the heroes that are trying to stop them. I guess they figured this out and they want to take her. On top of that, I saw that same gag earlier, 5 years before, in Superman 3, when the giant machine captures Superman in a giant veiny beach ball looking bubble. Except in that, they had the sense to suck all the oxygen out of it so he couldn't breathe.
Well, what's funny is, I mean, again, I love the art direction in that. They really go all out with some of the committal for like the equipment and that. At one point, the clowns, once they make it to town, they've done this montage where they wrapped up half the town in cotton candy cocoons. So then they've actually got a process out pretty good. They've got this big vehicle with like a vacuum. And so you've got the foot soldier clowns who go up into the buildings and they shoot people with the cotton candy cocoons, and then they dump them out onto the street. And then the clowns on the street suck them up with this big vacuum to take away. I'm like, that's efficient. That's actually very efficient.
Someone needs to do a supercut or an edit of the dark parade scene in this movie with the dark nighttime parade scene from Masters of the Universe, where Skeletor is also on his giant parade float through that small town, and have them like coming together, because I think they were going in opposite directions. I'd love to see that.
Let's not forget that Batman Returns had the wonderful train going down the street in a similar angle to Killer Klowns when they were putting all the firstborn babies inside cages that he was going to ride off, which, when I saw this scene where they're sucking up the cocoon, the cotton candy cocoons, I'm like, holy crap, this feels just like that scene from there.
Call it Terror Parade.
Parade. It will just be a montage of creepy parades down the middle of Main Street. We could get the Scooby-Doo one in there. You could do all kinds of, parades are apparently a very scary thing. But I loved that. I loved the design of the vehicle, the whole idea of the cotton candy cocoons, the hallways, the mythology with these killer clowns, even the climax. You're absolutely right. It is ridiculous for a ice cream truck to smash through the side of a spaceship. I get that. But at that point, suspension of disbelief has been dissolved and swept into a Swiffer and put in the garbage can as far as trying to, for logic. So for me, I guess it's not that big of a deal. And then there's this big, huge clown which attacks the ice cream truck, and it helps the ice cream truck initially. That helps our heroes get away, because these guys actually have a very dim moment of brilliance of realizing there's a clown head on the top of their vehicle, and so they talk as if this is like Master Clown commanding them, and it hesitates the clowns long enough for our three heroes to get away. But then you get this huge clown that fights, it smashes the ice cream truck and throws it, and the ice cream truck explodes. I love that whole sequence. But again, watching the behind the scenes, it's even more fascinating of how they shot that. They actually shot it at a lot faster speed than what it was actually. So to give the guy weight as he's walking, they explain it all. You can tell, again, the filmmakers definitely artists of their craft of special effects, because you listen to the behind the scenes stuff, they're very much talking about how they did the technical aspects of it. And that part I think is fascinating for sure. While I find the beginning of the what they present entertaining, the what they did with this film for what film it is actually really cool and impressive. But this whole scene, it's ridiculous. But at that point, I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm watching a film called Killer Klowns from Outer Space. Okay. And like you said, there's two ways you could do it. You could go into it dark, serious horror, or like many people, I think they just went in going, oh, this is just going to be fucking ridiculous. And it is. The characters you barely care for, except Mooney. I loved Mooney. John Vernon is so great in this, because there's this gimmick where he's the old cop. He's like old school, and he hates all the college punks. So they were college. That's right. They were college, because all the kids at this point were college. So even though they go to make out point, they're college. But he's all about, they aren't going to get my job. And when people start calling in saying clowns are attacking, he's just fucking hilarious. He's reading this book about the 9mm. It's an article in the catalog about your 9mm. And he's fascinated. He's smoking a cigar. And he's like, you're not going to get me. They got the whole town in on it.
Yeah, he thinks there's just this grand conspiracy, and he had some tension with him and the deputy. I mean, John Allen Nelson played the Deputy Hanson. I thought, Deputy Dave. I thought he was the most fascinating and dimensional character in this whole movie, especially because he had there's this weird dynamic, as I kind of mentioned earlier, between the leads of this film. You've got Mike and Debbie who are going out, but Debbie and Dave used to have some kind of a thing together. So usually when you've got that situation, the ex-boyfriend is going to turn out to be a real douchebag, or he's going to die, or maybe he dies heroically or something. So you've got the nice clean ending. In this movie, all three of them survive. Did you catch the sniff?
The sniff? There
go
was okay.
Go back and watch I think it's right before they all get like slimed with chocolate sundae goo.
Yeah, there was a sniff.
Yeah, like there's this really weird scene where the three principals are very happy to be alive. They've all escaped the spaceship. Deputy Dave, who everyone thought was dead, he escaped in the ice cream truck or whatever, came out. It's the big hero moment. They're standing together, congratulating themselves. And you see Deputy Dave behind Suzanne Snyder go. I'm like, what the hell? I rewound that because I'm like, I did not just see that. And I did.
And
no one acknowledged it. She didn't even seem to have noticed that it happened, but I saw it.
Well, what I actually suspect that is, because this was the Kyoto brothers' first film, so I believe directing and creating. I believe that's what they said. So, but I believe it's in the direction. I suspect what he was doing was preparing himself for being slimed by the pie. So, where you mentioned that, oh yeah, he could be sniffing her. At the same time, I'm wondering if he's just like, okay, here it comes.
No, watch the expression on his face. Okay. He was getting ready for the pie, but not what you're talking about.
Okay, well, I'll have to look at that again, because
and again, it's the thought process, because 10 minutes before this, or 15 minutes, as they're getting ready to go into the spaceship, they come across the body of the amusement park security guard who ran into the clowns, and they bring out a bunch of cream pies after getting out of the clown car, because it's 50 clowns fitting into a small car. It's wacky. They all take these cream pies and pelt the guard with it. And it turns out these things are filled with some kind of like a mixture of concrete and acid, because forces him into the ground in this giant blob, and it's also steaming and it melts off his skin. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Acid pie material. At the end, after they've defeated the aliens, the three principals look up and they get pelted with, chocolate syrup and whipped cream and stuff. Like, all right, so when is their faces going to start to melt off?
Well, you cut away to credits, so you're not, by then. But see, it's neutralized because the clown ship exploded. So that pie was not acidic pie like the other pie was.
You put more thought into that bullshit answer than anybody in this screenplay. And I congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It was neutralized because, the spaceship exploded. So it was inert now. The components that made it acidic are now inert. So, so there's I'm just saying maybe my imagination filled in the holes because, like I said, I love weird films like this. They don't necessarily have to have a great script if I still find them entertaining, and I did. But yeah, I mean, you make all valid points. Don't get me wrong. I am by far not saying that this film is writing wise is anything but just a gimmick to gimmick, homage to homage type of films that they enjoy, except for, like you mentioned, the one part with the puppeteering. There's a couple other spots too where it actually was a bit dark. The girl, the other scene, the scene with the young girl, the kid with her mom at the Big Top ice cream place, and the mom's talking, not paying attention to the kid, and the kid sees the killer clown outside, and he motions for her to come out and meet him. That part was actually very creepy. Maybe it's because I'm a parent. I'm like, aren't you paying attention to why aren't you paying attention to your kid? And luckily she does catch the girl before she goes out to look at the killer clown, which upsets the killer clown. But that part actually was a little dark. I'm like, are they going to go there? But they don't.
And I can tell you why. Listen to the score. There is a version of that scene from, I think it was It Chapter 2, a couple of years ago, where the little girl gets, I think, lured under the pier by Pennywise, and that was some scary stuff. In this movie, if you look at the John Vernon ventriloquist dummy scene and the score there, that's like a straight up, eerie horror score, and it's complemented by lighting. In that scene, it's in a brightly lit, kind of just like he's just outside the restaurant, and I think they've got that horror score. I'm not a score guy, so it's hard for me to articulate exactly how I, picked up on it. But it was just that horror music that is not really horrific, but you're trying to imply a sense of danger. That's meant to imply that you're watching a character who's sort of in trouble, but nothing's going bad really is going to happen to them. I knew immediately just by listening to the music that the mom was going to come out, and also that I'd seen the movie a couple of times before, that she was going to get snatched away. Yeah, they keep cutting to the giant mallet that he's got behind his back, but I'm like, no. On top of that, this is not the kind of movie where they're going to do something really horrific to a little girl.
No, it isn't. I mean, you might think it very like a minutia, like, are they? But yeah, most likely not. And the music, it has that underscoring where it was, most of it is done with synth. And actually, they talked to the composer in the behind the scenes stuff too. He was very into this score, and so he used a lot of synth in composing this, and that's what he was going for. He was trying to go for a little bit underlying atmospheric tone with the music. It's a little unnerving, using some minor chords and that. So something might be coming up, even though there's nothing going on screen. And so I mean, I like the music for that. The music for me was a bit more incidental with this. I didn't pay too much attention to the score. It fit for the movie. I mean, we're talking an 80s film called Killer Klowns, so you're gonna get what you're gonna get. It had an estimated budget of $2 million, so
it's an achievement, but the best way I can put this is, I think I saw this movie before I saw the Blob remake.
Mhm.
And so this is like the warm up to the Blob. If I were to watch, even when I was 11, I said I really thought this movie was cool because it was an early, horror film, and it was like a sleepover movie, and it's fun to watch these clowns do all this really weird stuff. But then you watch The Blob, and you're like, okay, so I'm taking exactly the same movie, but I'm really paying attention to the script and the casting and amping up those horror elements to create something that's very suspenseful out of a premise that's almost exactly as ridiculous. Space jelly comes down and terrorizes a small town, and yet it's creepy. It's full of these great ideas and these wonderful performances. Yeah, and I think about like The Lost Boys, which came out the year before, which we're talking about the ice cream truck driving through the wall at the end. Same, that was the exact climax. That's how the characters were rescued at the end of The Lost Boys. Grandpa drives his truck through and stakes Kiefer Sutherland. So this movie kept reminding me of other movies, and I feel like the Kyoto brothers were so focused, and I'm just speculating, they're so focused on making a cool looking, fun movie. It's like, oh yeah, we could just do something like they did in Lost Boys, or we could do something like they did in this other movie, and we'll just kind of put it in there, and we could make it look cool and look fun. We'll put clowns in it. I'm like, that's all right. But if you're talking about, just for me, I like my horror comedies to be horrific and scary and to have kind of a pulse. You used the word inert earlier. This is just kind of inert for me. Once I've seen it, I don't need, I've realized I never need to watch this movie again.
Yeah, and I totally legit argument. I mean, you make fine points. It's going to be select taste even for those who like crazy films. And looking at it now, it definitely for a younger crowd. It was in general made for a younger, like the teenage crowd. This is a teenage horror film for sure. And like you pointed out, you enjoyed it a lot more as a teenager. And I could definitely see even teenagers today sitting down a bit and enjoying the crazy campiness and everything, and the silly stuff going on. Those who aren't trying to be the next Roger Ebert on YouTube may actually enjoy this as well. It's definitely not really for an older audience, I think, because like you said, you asked too many questions. Though I would be interested in the original ending that they planned, in which Dave actually dies in the exploded ship, because the ship explodes after he which, come on, you've got to at least appreciate how he takes out Clownzilla. The big clown grabs him, lifts him up close, is about to eat him. He's got like really nothing left, but then he thinks about it. He pulls out his badge, because the way you kill the clowns is shoot him in the nose, which I think is
that's a great idea. And that reminds me of another movie, which was the way that Freddy died in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, where I think he gets the crucifix in the forehead, and then he starts like spinning around and gets swept up in this ball of light. They kind of do that with these special effects with these clowns, and that is very cool. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it made sense. That's what was funny, is because you're shooting them and it's not really affecting them, and then he shoots them in the nose and they explode brilliantly. And I love that. So here you have the big Clownzilla at the very end. He gets up just about to eat him, and he thinks, oh wait, I have my badge. He takes his badge and pops the nose of this big behemoth of a clown. And I just love that. That brought a smile to my face, because what the gimmick all along of shooting them just in their nose to kill the clowns, I thought was great. And in here, I forgot about that part. So when it happened, I'm like, oh, that made sense within the world of the film, and that actually worked. That part actually worked because of what you established earlier. So that at least they had some thought on how they kill them. And pardon me, I'm sorry for bringing it up, but the behind the scenes stuff, the way they did some of that special effects, they did the compositing over it, but they actually had on a spinner broken mirrors, and they reflected green light against the broken mirrors, and they spun the broken mirrors so that in the room area you would get the actual lighting rather than any type of composited lighting. They actually used real lighting by just spinning a broken mirror column with green light.
Wow.
And then they composited over it the animation of the clown blowing up.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at the behind the scenes and what they did to the film, yes, the film presented on screen itself is gimmicks and homages and such just pasted together, which some will find entertaining, some won't. But if you look at the behind the scenes stuff, it's like, wow, the stuff that they did, this was cool stuff that of how they achieved this. They even talk about the car, because we talked about earlier about the clown riding alongside and he's smashing into the car. There was actually supposed to be a whole opening sequence where the guy in the car has an argument with his girlfriend and drives off because he gets too fresh with her in the car. And then the clown pulls up next to him and does that. But the car was supposed to launch. It was supposed to launch off of that bridge, in a spectacular fashion, right? So they had everything set up, and they talk about this where they had the cameras set up. They had people far distant so no one gets hurt, and multiple cameras. Everybody back away, back away. Well, apparently someone forgot to remove the sandbag from in front of the wheel of the car that they put in there to stop it from rolling downhill, before they do the gimmick. So what ended up happening is they say action, the cable that's tied to the car pulls the car, immediately breaks, but it pulls the car just enough so it just starts down the hill. So that's why it does kind of that not so climactic fall over the bridge.
It is a weird fall. And then when they cut away, and I think
I
don't even know if you see
fire.
Yeah. Is that thing going to explode? And yeah, it does, but it kind of does so off screen. There's a charm to this. Something I noticed, and actually rewound to this too, because I wasn't quite sure what I saw. There's a scene where they're in the spaceship and they're running away, and in this particular chamber they're in, there's all these weird shapes on the floor, like these colorful design patterns. I think it was Mike. When he's running, he stops, and when he stops, his foot actually nudges one of the patterns, like the fabric or whatever, the decal on the floor. Because when I first watched it, I thought, did the floor shake like an old Star Trek set? And I rewound it oh no, it didn't shake. It was solid. It was just the decal shifted because it wasn't glued down enough.
Yeah, but I mean, I like the chase scene where they're being chased and you get the doors. I loved the door gimmick too, where they open the door and there's a smaller door and a smaller door and a smaller door.
Willy Wonka. Sorry.
Well, of course it's really there. It's full of homage, and I think that's what has garnered it such a cult classic. Is that a lot of people enjoy noticing all the references in there, not just the blatant blob ones, but as we've mentioned tonight, so many influences show up in this film. But it's almost like it's just gimmick. We want to do this, and this would be cool, and this would be cool as they put it together, rather than doing a narrative more complete that has story. But you're right. It has charm, though. There is some charm, I think, in this film. Just as long as you're not expecting a scary movie.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. It's a fine line, and I think it's blurry and ill-defined when you've got a screenwriter who sits down and says, I want to pay homage to a bunch of things that influence me, coming up as a creative person, versus someone who sits down and says, I'm going to steal everything I've seen in every movie ever and put it into a script. And you've got both scripts next to each other. How do you tell which one is which? Because at a certain point, it's like, you could say, oh, he's just paying homage, or he has no ideas. He's just stealing from everybody.
Well, we did a full episode on that a while back in the Spoiler Room about homage versus ripoff. The fine line of, well, what do you consider, a ripoff versus an homage? I would say these are homages. I don't feel like they're ripping it off and saying, hey, look at us, we're being that. But at the same time, they're doing all their influences. They got an opportunity to make a film, and they wanted to put stuff that they've enjoyed seeing in the past, but put a spin on it with the clown environment. And that's what they did with this film, which, again, not a surprise. It was not a big hit in the theaters. I know that was a surprise, Ian. I know I can tell you're shocked by this knowledge, but They actually made revenue on action figures, t-shirts, DVDs, merchandise, the cult following that it had. I mean, if anything, this is a prime example of, you know, almost like a early Charlie Band and Lloyd Kaufman type of approach to filmmaking, where you're making this film and the film itself might not do so good, but the merchandising around it and the gimmick and everything about it is very appealing. And that's where you make your money versus on the movie itself. You make it on the merchandising. We put the film's name on everything.
Well, I mean, yeah, I missed an opportunity. Even though I'm not that big a fan of the movie, I am a fan of kind of like what you said, the iconography of it and everything. The Kyoto brothers actually came to Chicago to the Music Box Theater a number of years ago with Killer Klowns and made a whole big event out of it. And I wasn't able to go, but I certainly would have if I I don't remember what was keeping me from it. Probably just adult obligations. You know, those pesky things.
Responsibilities.
Seriously, growing old sucks.
It does.
but yeah, and I don't begrudge anybody. I know I'm tearing this movie apart and you know, treating it like an old fuddy-duddy Ebert-esque type figure here, but I do love the fact that there are people out there like you who love it for what it is and really have a great time with it. And I think maybe if I'd gone to see this at a midnight movie at the Music Box, I could very well get swept up in the atmosphere. It's just a different experience when I'm sitting at home watching it on my laptop, and it's like the 5th time I've seen it in my life, and I realized that probably viewing number 2 was enough.
Oh no, totally. This is a party film. This is a fun film. This is one of those films you can put on with a group of friends. You pop popcorn and you chuckle and you laugh and you enjoy it that way. Watching it by yourself, yeah, I was smiling in that, but it's definitely one that you need a group. This is one of those films where, and I think that's, if you think about some of the other films that are considered cult classics or whatnot, I think that's a common trait among a lot of them, which might attribute to the fact they're cult classics. They're ones where if you're watching it by yourself, okay, you find it entertaining. You get a group of people who also want to watch it. It adds another level to the film and enjoyment of it, because you're then at that point not necessarily paying attention to, well, that really that doesn't make sense, you know, to the plot and why that direction, or you know, which, because I found myself looking at it through those eyes for this episode, and that's why I say all your points are legitimate. But if you got a group of people, you're not focused on that at all. You're just having a rowdy time, laughing at the gimmicks, and the goofy looking, well designed clowns. You know, so I think that's what is part of the appeal for a lot of people on it.
Well, before I die, which hopefully is gonna be a long time from now,
hopefully
I want to go to a midnight. I want to go to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show at a midnight screening on the big screen, which hopefully will not be a long time from now. Because I've never seen Rocky Horror Picture Show all the way through. I think I've tried 3 times, and without fail, I fall asleep when Meatloaf enters the picture. I love Meatloaf.
Of all the points in the film to fall asleep, it's actually when Meatloaf shows up.
Because he shows is like a half hour into the movie, or I feel like, yeah. But by the time he gets there, I'm so exhausted by everything else that I've watched, because it's not a brisk movie. I mean, I haven't tried in like probably 10 years, but I'm just kind of so over it by then that even that spark, I'm like, okay, I need a break, and I just never go back to it, or I fall asleep. So I'm hoping that getting caught up in that crowd atmosphere, which doesn't make sense because I go to bed early because I get up early. So going to a midnight movie is not a guarantee that I'll stay awake even if I'm in a crowd, but it's a working hypothesis.
You know, take some jitter chocolate covered coffee beans before you go. There you go. You'll be fine.
It's a good idea. Yeah. I don't know. Do they have Rocky Horror themed like candies or goodies, or alcohol? Well, I mean, wouldn't help. But
no. Well, it depends on if you get a sleepy drunk or, you know, happy drunk. But they don't have specific theme, but you're supposed to bring stuff to throw at the screen and such. So you know, for the audience participation part. So there is that. But yeah, Killer Klowns. I mean, this is one of those that, yeah, I definitely can see many people not enjoying it. I enjoy it it's got a lot of the stuff that I really like from a B film. I don't watch it for the story, in all honesty. I will fully say I don't watch. This is one of those films I don't watch for the story. I watch for the gimmicks, the visuals, the stuff that they're doing, because I'm a visual guy and probably with my undiagnosed ADD, it's a type of film that can handle my attention span. So, maybe that's it as well. But it's interesting. And in fact, it's seen a resurgence over the years to the point where it is announced that I think Netflix is going to be doing a sequel and getting the Kyoto brothers a chance to do a sequel.
Which I am all for, but get a real screenwriter. And maybe that's what a sequel needs. It needs someone who is who's grown up or at least come of age in the era of like the mature horror comedy. Even I'm not a big fan of Stranger Things, but able to take the nostalgia and the horror and really do something with it. I don't think the Killer Klowns sequel is going to be as you like to call it, campy as the original, because I don't think that works anymore. I think if they want to go something absurd, it's going to be like really funny and really smart, and not just, we're going to try and make a bad 80s horror movie. We left those behind for a reason.
Well, some of us, others have those on our shelf, but it's I have some of them on my shelf. But yeah, fair points. I'm interested to see. I mean, it was just announced, so who knows if it's actually going to happen, but apparently, and according to Ibidem, it's going to be called Return of the Killer Klowns from Outer Space in 3D. But put out by Netflix. So yeah, not sure how they're gonna do that, but I'm curious. I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel and seeing what they're doing with it now. 40 years, 30 years, 33 years later. It'd be interesting to see what they do with this story and this film, because I think they could do some cool things. And you're right, though, they can't take the same approach as the original because of our just completely different consumers now.
Yeah, and especially the something that I raised my eyebrows early on when was it Mike and Debbie are going to investigate the tent, and they get out of the truck, and Mike is doing his impression of an Indian chief.
Oh, that did not land well at all.
It was it would start as one line. I'm like, okay, but then he keeps doing the bit. I'm like, oh no, stop.
Oh yeah, I mean that joke, that the way he did that. I mean, I've heard other people do it in less offense, saying many moons ago, and I've even said that, many moons ago when the water was clear and I was younger.
But he was one step away from going, doing.
But he literally jumps on the hood of his car, does an accent. He's squatting and pointing, and that was like, okay, when's this going to be over? And he kept doing it. I'm like, please be done soon. Please be done soon.
Yeah, and then Suzanne Snyder's like, lead the way, Chief, running at the mouth. I'm like,
yeah.
But I am all for seeing a Killer Klowns sequel done by Netflix. I hope they modernize the script, but I also hope, I have not seen, maybe I've seen some Kyoto Brothers stuff in the interim. I couldn't think of any at the top of my head, but what would be really cool is if they didn't modernize the special effects.
Still use the practical. You still use all the practical.
Don't use
stuff.
CGI. Just use mats and rear projection and front projection and practical everything, because that stuff still holds up even on Blu-ray. It looks really good. So I think if Netflix, they could probably save a lot of money and put it into a more ambitious, wider scope story. Like, well, we don't need to spend all this money on CGI. You just, give you your, we'll have an endowment for your effects workshop for the next 10 years. I think it'd be really great.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think and Netflix, if there's anyone who would probably do it that way, if you presented it right, they would probably take the chance to say, okay, because you're right, with the practical effects and the fact that these guys, that's their primary artist skill is the special effects. I mean, they did not make another full feature film after this. They still do special effects. They're very well renowned special effects. Actually, they do have done a lot of effects over the years. Um, because they're so good, you could actually get very cool close-up shots of these clowns. They actually light them so you can see the detail and the artwork put into them. They're not covered in shadow or shot from a distance or kind of fuzzy so you can skip things, because they know the art and work they put into them and they want to show it off, and it looks good. I mean, these masks are legitimately scary. If these clowns were in a more legitimate horror script, they would be some seriously scary stuff right up there with your other 80s horror icons, in all honesty. And they're still icons, but for a completely different reason, because regardless of how the script is, the clowns themselves are built scary and creepy. Yeah. They really are. And they do get their moments to be creepy like that, just probably not enough for you to really consider this anything scary. But it's still a fun pop popcorn, get some alcohol and some friends, and just sit down and turn your brain off. I mean, these Kyoto brothers, they did special effects for one of my favorite sword and sorcery films, The Sword and the Sorcerer. So they did a lot of fabrication work for it, which that, I imagine they're the reason why you have the triple bladed sword. So
I've not seen The Sword and the Sorcerer.
What?
Yeah, that reference is lost on me.
Oh my, okay. I don't think we covered it for the podcast. If we didn't, we need to. If we have, you still need to watch it. Sword and Sorcerer has one of the greatest scenes in that I've always loved. I watched it again far too young because it was one of those that came out the Sword and Sorcery films like that Conan sparked. It came out during that time, and there's just a fantastic scene with a guy who's been crucified and the bad guys are eating dinner in front of him, and he does a thing. I don't want to root, but it looks awesome. I mean, there's some really cool effects. It is cheesy, but it's fun. That's a fun one. I recommend that. So check that out. And I looked that up and I'm like, oh, they did the special effects for that. That's cool because there's some fun stuff going on in there for sure. So there you have it, folks. For better or worse, Killer Klowns from Outer Space, closing out our Where You From month. This has been an interesting month, a variety of different films for sure. And next month, I'm going to tease it now, folks. It's Don't Fuck with Chuck month. I almost didn't have a theme, but we came up with a theme. So it's Don't Fuck with Chuck month. And it is Chuck Norris films. And we're doing all 3 missing in action films because why not? And we're going to do a 90s Chuck Norris film called Hellbound because Chuck Norris fighting a demon. I could have gone with another Chuck Norris film, but from the 80s, like Invasion USA or whatnot. But I'm like,
Chuck or Norris sidekicks.
Was it Firewalker?
With Louis Gossett Jr. Right?
Yeah. With your man from Iron Eagle. So,
or Dodgeball. He was in Dodgeball. I think he had a cameo.
Oh,
yeah.
Dodgeball. Okay, we're done now. That's where we're ending the podcast, folks. He just brought up Dodgeball. So this is the point where I give my wonderful crew member a license to shill. So Ian, please, the floor is all yours, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm Ian Simmons. You can find me at Kicking the Seat, which is at kickseat.com. I also have the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel where I put up 2 to 3 movie review related videos and critics roundtables and things every week. And also on Friday nights, as you all know, because you watch this show and we're talking about it all the time, we do a live stream talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney Plus. And Mark has been gracious enough to be a guest on that show. We have a panel of folks talking about each episode each week. So we're going to be doing that for the next 4 weeks. We have a month left. until whatever comes next on Disney Plus. So that's fine. It's 8:30 p.m. Central. Come hang out. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. Yes, it's an honor to be on that show, and they haven't kicked me off yet, though I talk too much, so I get passionate about things. So
you're just taking my lead on that. I get soapboxy on stuff, and I just will not shut up. So it's totally fine.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation, folks. I hit my mic here. That's lovely. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, folks. And yeah, subscribe to us on iTunes. We got an AMA coming up July 9th. Haven't picked the actual time yet, but I am planning some things during that long event. I don't know how long it is. I'm going to be sending an invite to a bunch of people. Just say pop in wherever, and I'll get on live stream, talk about videos I've done in the past 15 years on YouTube. Yes, 15 years. Folks, that's how long it's been. You know how long it's been? Lonely Trooper episode. Comment that I had on a Lonely Trooper episode. Someone said, "Wow, I found this. I used to watch these when I was a kid." So there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for listening. And we'll just say now, good night, everyone.
Good night.